Why did no one notice the way she hesitated that morning? Why didn't anyone see the tremor in her hand as she lifted her coffee, the way her eyes lingered on the street outside, as if trying to memorize the simplicity of normal life? Sarah Martinez didn't know it would be the last time she kissed her cat goodbye and left her apartment without limping. She didn't know her voice, the very sound that carried urgency and comfort to strangers in chaos, would be taken from her before the day ended. She just knew she was late, and that, in her world, being late was unacceptable. The call came in at 11:30, a construction site accident, multiple casualties. Her partner Jake had already pulled the ambulance out of the bay by the time she buckled herself in. Sirens cut through the city like a blade. Sarah felt the familiar surge of adrenaline. This was her battlefield. Concrete and glass towers instead of mountains, steel gurneys instead of rifles. Yet the demand was the same: run toward the sound of chaos when everyone else runs away. Downtown Chicago swallowed them whole as the ambulance tore through intersections. The city was alive, unaware that just blocks away, lives were being broken. Sarah knew the script by heart: check vitals, control bleeding, move fast, move smart, and don't think too long because hesitation cost lives. But something about this call felt different. The sight was madness: a scaffolding collapse, men screaming under twisted rebar, the metallic groan of stressed beams echoing overhead, dust thick in the air, catching the sunlight like smoke. She didn't pause. She grabbed her medical bag and ran, weaving through helmets and reflective vests, her boots pounding against half-buried concrete. The first patient was conscious, bleeding badly. She cut through his shirt, pressed gauze, wrapped, stabilized. Jake lowered the stretcher beside her, eyes wide but focused. They worked like a machine, the rhythm of trust honed over years of sirens and flashing lights. But then came the sound. The building supervisor shouted warnings, his voice sharp with panic. Sarah followed his gaze upward. A massive slab of concrete, jagged and merciless, dangled above the site. Only a few bolts clung to it, bending, whining, threatening to give way. Every instinct screamed to move, to drag her patient to safety. But her hands kept working, IV line in, fluids flowing, pressure dressing firm. The man's pulse stabilized beneath her fingers. He needed seconds, just seconds more. She stayed. Jake screamed her name. Boots thundered on steel behind her. She knew she had no time. The sound of bolts snapping cracked the air like gunfire. One, then two, then the world fell. The last thing she saw before impact was the stretcher rolling toward safety. Then silence. No, not silence. The kind of sound that lives inside your bones. The weight of concrete crushing down, ripping through muscle and bone like paper. Her legs gone beneath tons of rubble. Her throat burning with the effort to scream, but nothing came out. Just a rasp. Just the horror of knowing her voice, her command, her power had been shattered in an instant. She stayed awake. 4 hours, trapped, pinned, immobile. The rescuers fought steel and stone above her. Machinery groaned. Hands reached in, brushing her skin. And Sarah, who never hesitated, couldn't move, couldn't speak, couldn't help. They called her a hero. They said she had pushed her patient toward safety. But lying there, crushed and voiceless, she didn't feel like one. She felt broken. When they finally pulled her free, the sky was too bright. Sirens wailed, but this time she wasn't behind them. She was beneath them on the gurney, her own blood soaking the sheets. The same halls of Chicago General that she had rushed through 100 times now swallowed her alive. Doctors shouted. Nurses ran. Her family wept. And Sarah drifted in and out of the nightmare, her voice gone, her legs ruined. 14 hours of surgery. Steel plates, screws, grafts. The body she once trusted like a weapon rebuilt with hardware and hope. And still, when she woke, all she could do was whisper. Broken air rattling through damaged cords. A paramedic who could no longer command a room, no longer bark orders over sirens, no longer call for more units with steady confidence. Her patient lived. That was the news they gave her when she clawed her way back to consciousness. He lived because she stayed. But what did that mean for her? The weeks that followed were darker than any night shift she'd ever known. Pain was relentless. Physical therapy was torture. Her legs refused to obey. Her voice, her weapon, her shield, her identity betrayed her at every attempt. Conversations collapsed into whispers. Visitors pitied her. She hated their eyes, hated their forced smiles, hated their empty reassurances. She had always been the one running into fire. Now she couldn't even walk across her room. Independence gone, pride gone. Silence filled the spaces where she once lived loud and certain. 3 months later, they moved her. A rehabilitation center, not a hospital. A place where the broken were rebuilt, not saved. Veterans with missing limbs. Firefighters with scarred faces. Police officers who had stared too long into explosions. They walked or wheeled through the halls like soldiers who had tasted hell. Their bodies bore the marks. Their eyes carried the weight. And yet there was something in the air she hadn't felt in months. Purpose. Her first day she sat at breakfast, toast trembling in her unsteady hands. Around her, laughter, stories. Scars displayed without shame. They weren't pitied here. They were warriors in a different kind of battle. Sarah, though, was silent. She hated her whisper, hated the reminder that even here she was less. The firefighter across the table adjusted her brace and smiled. The cop with one arm cracked jokes. They spoke, they connected, they lived. Sarah listened, alone in a crowded room. Therapy was worse. Linda, her physical therapist, refused to let her quit. Every scream of her muscles, every stumble, every tear, Linda pushed harder. "Your patient didn't give up," she said once, her voice sharp, steady. "Don't give up on yourself now." The words cut deep because they were true. Sarah fought, but she fought half-hearted. Her hands shook, her voice faltered, her legs gave way. She was drowning. And then he appeared. Wheeled in one afternoon. A new patient. Younger than some, older than others. Cropped hair, shoulders straight, scars everywhere. A missing leg wrapped tight beneath the steel of a prosthetic. His presence changed the air around him. David Chen, a Navy SEAL medic, injured overseas, and yet alive with a fire Sarah hadn't seen in anyone else. He attacked therapy like it was combat, every movement precise, disciplined. His eyes locked forward, jaw tight. When he stumbled, he didn't curse. He recalculated, adjusted, tried again. Sarah watched from across the room, resentment mixed with awe. She expected pity when he noticed her, expected the same rehearsed lines she had heard from 100 well-meaning faces. But when he rolled toward her chair, pausing to rest between sets, his words were not what she braced for. "You're holding back." No sympathy, no softness, just truth. Sarah's breath caught, her throat struggled. She tried to answer, and all that came was a rasp, a sound like torn paper. Her cheeks burned. She looked away. But David didn't. He waited, patient, silent. Finally, she forced the words out, barely audible. "Can't talk right." He nodded, as if that explained everything, as if it mattered to no one but her. "You're still communicating," he said simply. "With your body, with your eyes, with the way you move. The question is, what story do you want to tell?" No one had asked her that before. Not the doctors, not her family, not even herself. And in that question, a spark she thought long dead flickered. What story did she want to tell? The question wouldn't leave her. It followed her into the silence of her room, into the ache of her therapy sessions, into the late hours when pain throbbed in her legs and her voice refused to rise above a whisper. Sarah had always told stories with her actions. Every call, every rescue, every patient she touched. The story had been simple: "I will not leave you. I will not run." But now, she wasn't sure what her actions were saying. David didn't treat her like she was fragile. He didn't step around her silence or fill it with words. He let it hang. He let her fight through it. And when she managed to form even the shortest sentence, he didn't flinch at the rasp, didn't tilt his head with pity. He just listened as though every sound mattered. Days bled together in the rhythm of the center, morning stretches, torture disguised as therapy, nights spent staring at ceilings, yet now there was something different. She found herself watching him, not just the way he forced his body to obey, but the way he approached struggle itself. Clinical, relentless, patient. One afternoon, when Sarah collapsed midway through a balance exercise, fury burned through her tears. She slammed her fist against the mat, shaking her head, her throat producing only a harsh, broken growl. David moved closer, not to help her up but to crouch, steady on his prosthetic, his scarred hands resting on his knee. "You think anger means you're failing," he said quietly, "but I've learned something different. Anger means you still care enough to fight." Her chest rose and fell, sweat clung to her temples. For the first time in months, she didn't feel like collapsing meant the end. That night in the common room, he sat across from her. No introduction, no preamble, just words. "I read about your accident," he said. "You stayed when others ran. That's not normal. That's not luck. That's who you are." Her fingers twitched against the edge of the table. She wanted to argue, to gesture to her ruined legs, her broken voice, her silence. She wanted to say, "That person is gone." Instead, she rasped a single word: "Why?" "Because you didn't hesitate," he answered. "Because when it mattered most, you chose someone else's life over your own safety. That kind of courage doesn't die in rubble. It's still here." She dropped her eyes. For months she had measured herself by what was lost: her speed, her strength, her voice. And now he was pointing to something she hadn't even considered: the courage beneath it all. The next morning, she woke with his question echoing again. "What story do you want to tell?" She tried harder, she pushed longer, and though the pain still broke her in half, she didn't quit. Weeks passed. Slowly, something shifted. Her voice therapy sessions were still agony, but she stopped hiding behind the safety of silence. She forced the air out, forced the words through damaged chords, even when they came jagged and raw. And when she faltered, she thought of David's unflinching eyes, the way he waited for her to finish instead of rushing to save her from discomfort. Her therapist, Dr. Kim, noticed. "You're stronger lately," she said after one session. "Not just physically. You've stopped apologizing for your voice." Sarah didn't answer, not with words, but the faintest flicker of pride warmed her chest. The changes didn't go unnoticed by others either. Marcus, the loud ex-cop, clapped her shoulder at breakfast. "Look at you, Martinez," he said with a grin. "You're coming back to life." She almost whispered a denial, but then she let the words stay unspoken. One evening during group therapy, the discussion turned to choices, regrets, what each person would change if given the chance. Sarah froze. She had lived with that question since the accident, chewing it like glass in the dark. When her turn came, she glanced at David. His face was unreadable, but his eyes told her, "Say it, out loud." She drew a breath, her voice cracked, but the words came, "I would not change it." The room stilled, even the air seemed to pause. "I stayed," she rasped. "I'd stay again." Her throat burned, her hands shook, but when she finished she didn't feel shame, she felt clarity. Later, alone in the garden, David joined her on the bench. His steps were uneven but deliberate, the metallic click of his prosthetic steady in the night. "You finally answered the question," he said. She tilted her head, confused. "The one you've been asking yourself in silence since the accident. Would you do it again? Now you know." The night air was cool. For the first time in months, Sarah didn't feel like a ghost in her own skin. "Then what now?" she whispered. David leaned back, eyes on the stars. "Now you use that same courage to fight for yourself. The patient you saved didn't give up on life. Why should you?" His words hit harder than steel rods or therapy weights, because for months she hadn't thought of herself as worth saving. But maybe she was. In the days that followed, David's influence grew like a shadow stretching across her recovery. He didn't tell her what to do. He didn't cheer when she succeeded. He simply watched, corrected, questioned. Shift your weight forward. Don't protect the leg that doesn't need protecting. Stop measuring your voice by sound. Measure it by meaning. His corrections were sharp, precise, but never cruel, and he was always right. It was as if he saw her not as a broken paramedic, but as a peer, another professional navigating a different battlefield. That difference mattered. And slowly, Sarah began to realize something she had never dared consider. Maybe her story wasn't ending. Maybe it was only beginning to change. One afternoon, she found herself telling him about an old call. Her voice strained, her words halting, but the story slipped out anyway. A cardiac arrest in the back of a moving ambulance. The chaos of pounding chest compressions while the city blurred by outside. David listened, not to the broken rasp, to the meaning beneath it. He asked about details, airway management, timing, choices. He wasn't humoring her. He was engaging her as a medic. For the first time since the accident, she felt seen as more than her injuries. By the end of the session, her throat ached. Her voice was nearly gone, but she wasn't ashamed. She had been heard. That night she lay in bed staring at the ceiling, tears sliding silently into her hair, not from despair, from the fragile, terrifying return of something she thought was dead. Hope. But hope is dangerous. Because what if it wasn't real? What if she slipped? What if, after all the pain and progress, she ended up the same broken shadow who had stared at herself in hospital mirrors, unrecognizable? The fear gnawed at her. It followed her into therapy, into meals, into the garden where silence wrapped around her shoulders like a shroud. One evening she broke, she told him, words jagged, voice cracking, "When you leave, I'll be nothing again." He studied her, quiet, thoughtful. He always took his time before answering, and when he finally spoke, his voice was calm, steady, almost surgical. "Then maybe it's time to learn what's already inside you. Because I'm not here to save you, Sarah. I'm here to remind you that you can save yourself." The truth lodged in her chest like shrapnel, painful but undeniable. For hours afterward she replayed his words. She didn't know if she believed them, but she wanted to. And sometimes, wanting is the first step toward becoming. What if he was wrong? That was the thought that stalked her every morning when she opened her eyes in the rehab center. What if she wasn't strong enough? What if all this pain was wasted? What if David had mistaken stubbornness for courage? The doubts didn't leave when she walked or stumbled into therapy. They didn't leave when she whispered through another grueling session with Dr. Kim, her speech therapist, straining broken chords until her throat burned. But in the spaces between those doubts, something else had begun to grow. A question. Not what if I fail, but what if he's right? The shift was small, but it changed everything. That morning in physical therapy, Linda set a higher bar, parallel bars, balance exercises. Sarah hated them. They reminded her of how far she'd fallen, the paramedic who used to run toward danger now clinging to steel just to stay upright. She wanted to quit. The old instinct screamed, "You'll never be who you were. Stop embarrassing yourself." And then she heard it. Not Linda, not the other patients, but David's voice in her memory, "You're holding back." She gritted her teeth, pushed harder, shifted her weight like he'd told her. Her legs trembled, muscles screaming, but she didn't fall. She stayed for 5 seconds, 10, 15. Linda clapped once, sharp and approving. "There you go, Martinez. That's the fight I've been waiting for." Sarah didn't smile, but inside something cracked open, a space where determination could breathe again. That night in the dining hall, Marcus noticed. "You look different," he said around a mouthful of mashed potatoes. "Like you finally remembered you're one of us." Sarah tried to answer. Her voice rasped, fragile, but it came, trying. The table went quiet, not out of pity but respect, because they all knew how much that single word cost her. She still hated speaking, hated the effort, the sound, but David had shifted her view, It wasn't about sounding whole, it was about being understood. The next day, she tested the theory. During speech therapy, instead of focusing on tone, she focused on meaning. Dr. Kim asked her to describe a memory. Sarah forced out the words, halting, uneven. But the story emerged. A cardiac arrest, flashing lights, the rhythm of compressions in the back of an ambulance. Dr. Kim didn't correct her. She leaned forward. I understood every detail. That's what matters. Sarah's breath caught. She looked down, tears burning. For months her voice had been a source of shame. Now, for the first time, it felt like a tool again. Different, yes. Damaged, yes, but useful. Later in the garden, she told David what happened. Her words tumbled out broken but insistent. She understood me. Not sound, meaning. He nodded, unsurprised. Exactly. You've been measuring success by the wrong standard. No one cares if your voice sounds like it used to. They care if they understand you, and I do, every time. The simplicity of it shook her, because it meant her silence had been a cage she had built herself. That night she slept deeper than she had in months. But progress was never a straight line. 2 weeks later she hit a wall, her legs plateaued, her speech stuttered. Every exercise felt heavier than the last. She dragged herself through therapy sessions, rage rising with every failure. One evening she collapsed in her room, tears spilled unchecked. The whisper that escaped her throat was a plea meant for no one. Why keep trying? The door creaked. David stood there, leaning on his prosthetic. He didn't ask permission, he sat. She wiped her face, furious at her own weakness. Stuck, she rasped, going nowhere. He was quiet for a long moment. Then he said, You ever treat a cardiac arrest patient? She blinked, caught off guard. She nodded. How many compressions before you see improvement? Sometimes none, she whispered. Exactly. You keep pushing anyway, because stopping means death. Rehabilitation is the same. You don't stop because you're not seeing progress today. You keep going because tomorrow depends on it. Her breath shook. His words sliced through the fog. Sarah, he said, voice low but steady. The story you're writing right now isn't about how fast you heal. It's about whether you keep showing up. And that story, that's entirely in your hands. Something inside her shifted, again. The next morning she returned to therapy with a new mantra. Just keep compressing. Even if nothing changes, keep compressing. It wasn't glamorous, it wasn't heroic, but it kept her moving. And then came the breakthrough. During a group session, each patient was asked to share their biggest fear. When it was Sarah's turn, her throat clenched. The room waited. David watched, silent but steady. She forced the words, never useful again. Her voice cracked, her hands trembled, but the truth was out. And then slowly she added, but maybe different useful. The room shifted, heads nodded, Marcus whispered, that's it. For the first time, Sarah felt something she hadn't in months, belief. That evening, David approached her with a rare smile. There it is, he said, the story only you can tell. She tilted her head, which? The one where being broken isn't the end, it's the beginning. The garden lights flickered above them. Sarah leaned back, eyes on the sky. And for the first time since the rubble crushed her legs, she let herself imagine a future not built on what she'd lost, but on what she could still give. But even in that fragile moment of hope, a shadow lingered. Because in the back of her mind, she knew something she hadn't yet said aloud. David wouldn't be here forever. And when he left, could she still fight on her own? What happens when the person who steadies you is suddenly gone? The thought stalked Sarah long before David's discharge date was even mentioned. She caught herself watching him more closely. The way he attacked therapy, the precision in his corrections, the patience in his silences. He had become more than a fellow patient, more than a mentor. He was the mirror that showed her who she could still be. But what if that mirror disappeared? She tried not to think about it. She failed. Every night as she lay in her bed, staring at the sterile ceiling, the fear grew sharper. Without him, she would slip, back into silence, back into brokenness. The truth spilled out one evening in the garden. He had joined her on the bench, the same one where their most difficult conversations always seemed to take place. The night air was cool, the lamps humming above them. She stared at her hands, at the scars across her knuckles, before whispering the words. "When you leave, I'll be nothing again." David didn't rush to fill the silence. He never did. He studied her face, steady, as if searching for the weight beneath her words. "You're worried I've been carrying you," he said at last. Her eyes burned, she nodded. He leaned forward, elbows on his knees. "Let me tell you about a Marine I treated, second deployment. He stepped on an IED, lost both legs, internal damage. He believed the only way he'd make it was if I stayed by his side. Every time I left the room, he panicked, convinced I was the only one who could keep him alive." Sarah's throat tightened. The parallel was obvious. David's voice remained calm, but there was no softness in it. "I had to teach him that what he needed was already inside him. My job wasn't to save him forever. My job was to show him he didn't need me." She swallowed, her voice raw. "And did he learn?" David nodded once. "The day he believed he could do it without me was the day he actually began to recover." Silence stretched. Sarah's chest ached with the truth of it. She hated it, but she knew. She couldn't let her story be about leaning on someone else's strength. Still, fear lingered, the kind that whispered in the night, "What if I can't?" Over the next weeks, David began changing the rules, subtly, intentionally. In group therapy, when she struggled to form words, he didn't jump in with clarifying questions like he used to. He stayed quiet, let her fight through. At first, it felt cruel. Her throat burned, her words stumbled, and the silence seemed unbearable. But when she finally forced the sentences out, when people nodded in understanding, she realized what he was doing. He was making her prove to herself that she could stand on her own. In physical therapy, he positioned himself out of sight. No encouraging nods, no whispered corrections, just Linda's sharp commands and Sarah's own choices. And when she managed to walk farther down the bar, steadier than before, she turned and saw him in the corner, arms folded, watching but refusing to interfere. It infuriated her, it terrified her, and yet it worked. One night, frustration boiled over. She found him in the common room, hunched over a book. She slammed her hand against the table. "You're pulling away." Her voice rasped like gravel. He looked up slowly. "Exactly." The single word hit harder than a slap. Her chest heaved. She wanted to scream, but all that came out was a broken whisper. "Why?" His gaze didn't waver. "Because you need to stop seeing me as the answer. I was never the answer. You are." She staggered back. For a moment she hated him. Hated his clarity, his discipline, his refusal to coddle. But beneath that hatred, a sliver of understanding cut through. Maybe this was what love, not romantic, but raw human love, looked like. Not comfort, not rescue, but truth. The turning point came when Dr. Richards, the director of the center, approached her with a new idea. A peer support program. Survivors helping survivors. "Sarah," he said, folding his hands in his office, "you have something rare, medical knowledge, personal trauma, and a voice, broken, yes, but honest. I want you to meet with a new patient, someone who's where you were months ago." The thought made her stomach twist. Her voice was still shaky, her legs still weak. How could she guide anyone when she barely held herself together? That evening she told David, her whisper was sharp with panic. "I can't, I'm still broken." He studied her expression, unreadable. Then, "Good." She blinked, stunned. "Good." "Because the people who need you don't want perfection. They want proof that broken people can still fight. That's exactly who you are." His words rattled in her bones, terrifying, liberating. The next morning she was introduced to Jennifer, a young teacher in her 20s. Car accident, shattered pelvis. Anger radiated from her like heat. Their first session was a disaster. Sarah stumbled through words, her voice catching, her body tense. Jennifer crossed her arms, unimpressed. Finally, she snapped, "You're still broken. What could you possibly teach me?" The words gutted Sarah. She left the session early, retreating to the garden, her chest tight with humiliation. She sat on the bench, staring at her scarred legs, whispering to herself, "Fraud. She's right. I'm a fraud." David found her there. He didn't sit right away, just stood, his shadow stretching long across the gravel. "When you were a paramedic," he asked quietly, "did patients ever refuse your help because you weren't a doctor?" Her head jerked up, confused. "You weren't the highest authority," he continued. "There were surgeons, specialists, people who knew more, so why did patients trust you?" Sarah blinked. The answer rose unbidden, "Because I was there." "Exactly," David said. "Not because you had every answer, but because you showed up. Competent, compassionate, present. That's all Jennifer needs, not a perfect example, just proof she's not alone." His words cracked the armor she'd wrapped around her fear. The next meeting with Jennifer, Sarah tried something different. Honesty. She didn't project confidence she didn't feel. She spoke about the nights she wanted to quit, about the anger that burned through her, about the shame of whispering words that sounded nothing like her old self. Jennifer's eyes, hard at first, softened. For the first time she listened. And in that listening, Sarah realized something extraordinary. Her brokenness wasn't a barrier. It was a bridge. The more she shared, the more Jennifer leaned forward, her own anger finding an echo in Sarah's. By the end of the session, Jennifer whispered, "You get it." Sarah walked back to her room that night trembling, but not from fear. From the realization that maybe, just maybe, she had something left to give. When she told David, his smile was small but certain. "Told you. You don't need me to make you strong. You just needed someone to remind you where your strength already was." And though the fear of his leaving still lingered, something new had taken root inside her. Independence. For the first time since the accident, she began to believe that when David finally walked out of the center, she would not collapse into nothingness. She would stand. On broken legs, with a broken voice, carrying a story no one else could tell. What if helping others was the only way to save herself? The question crept in after her second meeting with Jennifer. She'd gone in shaking, her voice a rasp that scraped against the air, certain the young teacher would dismiss her again. But when she spoke about the nights she wanted to burn it all down, about the helpless rage that consumed her in those early weeks, Jennifer's eyes softened. She listened. And in that listening, something shifted for both of them. Sarah left the session trembling, not from shame this time, but from the fragile spark of purpose. It terrified her almost as much as it thrilled her. Dr. Richards noticed. The director had been waiting for a moment like this. "I want you to meet with 2 more patients," he told her, voice steady but eyes searching hers. "Different injuries, different struggles. They don't need perfection. They need honesty, the kind you can give." Her instinct was to refuse. She almost whispered, "I'm not ready." But then David's words echoed, "Broken isn't a barrier, it's a bridge." So she said yes. The first was Michael, a construction worker paralyzed from the waist down after a fall. Anger radiated from him like heat off asphalt. When Sarah sat across from him in their first session, he sneered. "You're their puppet," he spat. "They bring you in here to make me feel inspired, to parade around someone worse off so I'll shut up and stop complaining. Screw that." The words cut deep. For a second, Sarah wanted to bolt from the room, to retreat back into silence. But instead, she stayed. She let him rage, every bitter accusation, every curse. She let him throw his pain at her. When he finally stopped, breathing hard, she spoke. Her voice cracked, but her words were steady. "I know anger, I lived in it, screamed at nurses, cursed my family, hated everyone whose life wasn't ruined like mine. The anger is real, but it's not forever." Her words hung in the air, raspy but unflinching. Michael's glare faltered. For the first time he saw not a puppet but a mirror. He didn't say thank you, didn't soften, but he came back the next day, and the next. Slowly, he began participating in therapy, not because he trusted the staff, but because he trusted that Sarah understood his fire. Then came Amy, a marathon runner whose injuries ended her career overnight. Unlike Michael, she didn't rage. She smiled politely, cooperated with her therapists, nodded at every suggestion. But Sarah recognized the mask. She'd worn it herself. "You're pretending," Sarah said bluntly in their second session. Amy blinked, caught off guard. "You say you're fine," Sarah rasped, "but inside you're gone. I know that face. I lived behind it for months." Amy's composure cracked, tears spilled, and for the first time she admitted that without running, she didn't know who she was. Sarah leaned forward, voice rough but steady. "You're more than what you lost. It takes time to find it, but you're not just a runner, you're still Amy." The words weren't polished, they weren't strong, but they were real, and real was enough. Session by session, Sarah realized that speaking to others forced her to confront truths she'd avoided in herself. Every time she encouraged Michael to channel his rage into movement, she reminded herself not to drown in her own. Every time she told Amy she was more than her injuries, she believed a little more that she was, too. Helping them didn't just guide them forward, it pulled her with them. The center noticed. Staff whispered about the change in her. Dr. Richards smiled knowingly when he saw her walking into peer sessions with a notebook in one hand, determination in her step. Linda, her physical therapist, nodded approvingly at the new strength in Sarah's movements. Even Dr. Kim remarked that her voice carried farther now, raspy but certain. But with every victory came a shadow, because David's discharge date loomed closer. The center buzzed with rumors. He was ahead of schedule, his prosthetic training nearly complete, his other injuries healing faster than expected. Soon he'd be gone. Sarah tried not to think about it. She tried to bury herself in peer sessions, in therapy, in every scrap of purpose she could cling to. But the thought followed her like a ghost. What if she lost her anchor? One evening, she found herself confessing it to him again. They sat in the garden, the familiar hum of lamps above them. "When you leave," her throat tightened, "I'll fall back." He didn't answer right away. He studied her, then finally said, "You think I've been your lifeline?" Her eyes burned, she nodded. "Wrong," he said flatly. "I've been your mirror. You've been your own lifeline all along. You just didn't believe it yet." Her breath hitched. She wanted to argue, but deep down she knew. Every breakthrough hadn't come from his presence. It had come from her choosing to fight even when it hurt. Still, fear gnawed at her. David saw it. He leaned back, voice steady, measured. "Sarah, I won't always be here, but everything you've built won't vanish when I walk out. You've already proven it to Jennifer, to Michael, to Amy, to yourself. You don't need me to keep standing. You just need to remember why you started." She stared at him. For months she had feared that his leaving would mean the end of her progress. But maybe it could be the final test. The next day, during group therapy, she proved it. When her turn came to share, she didn't look at him for approval. She didn't wait for his silent nod. She spoke. Her voice was raspy, uneven, but strong. "I used to think being broken meant being useless," she said. "But broken doesn't mean useless. It means different, and different can still matter." The room was silent, every eye on her, and for once she didn't shrink under the weight of it. She stood taller, stronger herself. Later that night, as she lay in bed, she thought of the story she had been telling all along. The story of a paramedic crushed under concrete, silenced, stripped of purpose. And now, a different story. One of someone who had found a way to keep saving lives, even when she couldn't run into burning buildings anymore. David had been right. Broken wasn't the end. It was the beginning. But even with that truth, one question still haunted her as his departure drew closer. Would she be able to carry the weight of this story when he was no longer there to remind her of it? What happens when the person who carried your reflection walks away? Sarah didn't have to imagine it anymore. The announcement came during a routine check-in. David's discharge papers were being finalized, his prosthetic training nearly complete, his body, though scarred, stable enough to continue recovery outside the center. The news hit her harder than the weight of concrete ever had, not because she wanted him to stay broken, but because she didn't know who she'd be when he left. For days, she found herself watching him, memorizing the lines of his scarred face, the deliberate steadiness of his walk, the calm weight of his presence. She hated the way her chest tightened every time she thought of the empty chair he'd leave behind in therapy, the silence where his blunt truths once cut through her self-doubt. One evening in the garden, she broke. Her voice cracked as the words tore out. "When you're gone, I'll lose myself." David's gaze held hers. No pity, no hesitation, just the quiet steadiness she had come to rely on. "You won't," he said. "How can you know?" "Because I've seen you stand without me. You just don't realize it yet." She shook her head, whisper thin, "What if I fall?" "Then you fall and you get back up. That's the story." The words lodged in her chest like a blade, painful, true. In the final week before his departure, he changed his approach. He didn't walk with her to therapy. He didn't correct her posture or whisper reminders. When she stumbled, he let her stumble. When she faltered for words, he let silence stretch until she forced them out. At first, she hated him for it. It felt like abandonment before he had even left. But then she realized this was his gift, his final mission, to make her see she could fight without him. The night before his discharge, the patients gathered in the common room for a farewell. Stories spilled like wine. Marcus told of the day David had shown him a better way to balance on one arm. Elena, the firefighter, described how his relentless focus had pushed her through her first steps after spinal injury. Every voice carried respect, gratitude. Sarah sat silently at first, her throat thick, her palms damp. She wanted to vanish. But then the room quieted, expectant eyes turning to her. Her chest tightened. She forced air through scarred cords. "When I met David," her voice cracked, rough but steady enough to carry, "I thought I was finished. Couldn't walk, couldn't talk, couldn't imagine a future." Her hands trembled. She gripped the edge of her chair. "He didn't fix me. He reminded me I wasn't beyond repair. He made me believe broken doesn't mean useless. It means different, and different can still save lives." The room was silent. Every face turned toward her, and for the first time she didn't shrink. Her voice might have been ragged, but it was strong enough. David didn't smile much, but that night he did, small, certain, proud. The next morning he left. No dramatic goodbye, no lingering embrace. Just a firm nod, a steady look, and the quiet words, "Keep writing your story." And then he was gone. The void he left was immediate. Therapy felt heavier, the dining hall quieter, the garden emptier. At night, she lay awake listening for the metallic click of his prosthetic down the hall and hated the silence when it never came. The fear returned, sharper than before. What if she backslid? What if she lost the fragile progress she'd made? The first test came days later. A new patient. A teenager named Eric, injured in a car crash, both legs shattered, his future in fragments. He refused therapy, refused visitors, refused to speak. Dr. Richards asked Sarah to meet with him. Her instinct screamed no. Without David, she felt hollow, weak. But then she remembered his words, "You've stood without me before." So she went. The boy sat slumped in a wheelchair, eyes dull, arms crossed. He didn't look at her when she entered. She sat across from him, hands trembling, voice rasping. "I know what silence feels like." His eyes flicked up, skeptical. "I lost my voice," she whispered. "Crushed in rubble, couldn't speak for months, still can't, not the way I used to." He blinked, said nothing. "I hated it," she continued, her throat raw. "Hated seeing pity in every face. Hated needing help to do things I once did without thinking. Wanted to quit, wanted to vanish." His jaw tightened. His fingers tapped against the armrest. "And yet," she whispered, leaning forward, "I'm still here, speaking to you. Different, yes, but here. And if I can be here, so can you." The silence stretched. Then slowly he asked, "How?" Her breath caught. It was the first word he'd spoken since arriving. "How did you not quit?" Tears burned her eyes. "Because someone reminded me I was still worth fighting for, and now I'm reminding you." The boy didn't answer. But the next day, he wheeled himself into therapy, and the day after that, he tried again. Sarah walked back to her room trembling, tears spilling freely. Because in that moment, she realized something terrifying and liberating all at once. She had stood, without David, on her own. And maybe, just maybe, that was the point all along. Her story wasn't about being saved. It was about learning to save herself. And in saving herself, she had found a way to keep saving others. What if the purpose she'd been searching for was already in her hands? Sarah didn't realize it at first. She was too caught up in survival, in pushing through therapy, in proving to herself she could stand without David's shadow beside her. But then came the moment with Eric, the boy who had spoken his first word to her, not his doctor's. A simple "how." That single word changed everything. It wasn't just that she had reached him. It was that in reaching him she felt herself heal. Every conversation with the broken, the angry, the bitter, the hopeless was like holding up a mirror. Each time she reminded them they weren't useless, she reminded herself. Each time she told them their story wasn't over, she believed a little more that hers wasn't either. Dr. Richards noticed before she did. He called her into his office one morning, papers stacked on his desk. "I want you to expand your role," he said. "Not just one patient at a time. I want you to help us build something bigger." Sarah frowned, her voice rasping with doubt. "Bigger?" "A peer support program," Richards explained. "Survivors helping survivors. You've already proven it works. Jennifer's different, Michael's different, Amy's different, and you're different too. This isn't just therapy, it's transformation. I want you to lead it." The word lead made her chest tighten. She shook her head, her whisper breaking. "I'm not enough." Richards leaned forward, his eyes kind but firm. "You think your scars disqualify you. They don't. They make you credible. Patients don't need perfection. They need proof. And you are proof." The words lodged deep, the way David's once had. That night in the garden, Sarah whispered into the empty air, as though David were still sitting beside her. "They want me to lead." Silence answered, but she could almost hear what he would have said. "Good, because you can." So she began. At first it was messy. Her voice faltered in group sessions. She lost her train of thought. Sometimes her body trembled so badly she had to sit down mid-sentence. But the other patients didn't mock her. They didn't pity her. They listened. Because what she spoke wasn't theory, it was survival. When Michael raged, she let him. And when he was finished, she said softly, "I remember hating the world too." When Amy despaired, she whispered, "You're not only what you lost." When Eric doubted, she rasped, "If I can speak with this broken voice, you can try too." Slowly, the group shifted. They began to challenge one another, not just the therapists. They began to own their stories, not hide from them. And Sarah found herself at the center, guiding without commanding, leading without demanding. Her voice grew stronger, still raspy, still scarred, but steadier. Dr. Kim noticed. "You're pushing harder now," she said during a session. "What changed?" Sarah's answer was simple, whispered but firm. "They need me." And in needing her, they gave her what she hadn't realized she needed most: purpose. Weeks turned into months. The program expanded. Sarah was asked to sit with new arrivals, the ones too numb or too angry to engage. She became the first face they saw, the proof that survival was possible. She never sugar-coated, never promised miracles. Instead, she offered something rarer: honesty. "Recovery isn't about going back," she would tell them. "It's about becoming someone new, different but not less." And every time she said it, she believed it a little more. But with growth came new fear. What if she wasn't enough for the weight she was being asked to carry? What if she failed these people who looked at her as living proof? The question gnawed at her when she was invited to speak at a staff meeting: doctors, therapists, administrators. She stood at the front of the room, her legs trembling, her throat dry. For a heartbeat, she almost fled. Then she remembered David's words, "What story do you want to tell?" So she told it. Not the polished version, the raw one, the rubble, the silence, the rage, the moment she believed she was useless, and then the slow, agonizing rediscovery that brokenness wasn't the end. Her voice cracked, tears stung her eyes, but when she finished, the room was silent in a way that wasn't pity. It was respect. One doctor leaned forward. "You've just described what textbooks never capture. We need to hear this. More people need to." That night Sarah sat in her room, staring at the ceiling, her chest tight with something unfamiliar. Not dread, not despair, anticipation. Maybe her story wasn't just for this center. Maybe it could ripple outward, touching others who thought their lives ended the day their bodies broke. But even as the idea grew, so did the memory of loss. David wasn't there to see it. He had been right, she could stand without him. But oh, how she wished he could see her now. One evening, after leading a peer group, she lingered in the garden, whispering into the night air, "I stood today, without you." And though no one answered, she felt something in her chest settle, a quiet certainty. Because this was the story she wanted to tell. Not of a woman silenced and crushed beneath rubble, but of a woman who rebuilt her voice into something new. A voice not loud, not flawless, but steady, honest, useful. And for the first time since the accident, Sarah no longer feared the future. She wanted it. What if the story she thought had ended was only the beginning? Months passed, and Sarah found herself no longer defined by the therapy schedule on the bulletin board. She was still a patient, yes, still scarred, still walking with effort, still rasping words from a damaged throat. But those things no longer told the whole story. Now her story was written in other people's progress, in Michael's quiet determination as he pushed through therapy without cursing the world, in Amy's laughter as she helped another patient stretch, rediscovering life outside running, in Eric's first halting steps with crutches, his eyes shining with something Sarah recognized: belief. She had been part of all of it, and in giving them her broken honesty, she had found something she never thought she'd have again: purpose. But purpose, she was learning, doesn't stay small, it grows. Dr. Richards saw it first. He approached her after a group session, his expression serious but kind. "We've been invited to a conference," he said. "Military medicine, rehabilitation, survivors' voices. I want you to speak." Her stomach dropped. The thought of standing in front of strangers, of forcing her scarred voice into a microphone, made her throat seize. "I can't," she rasped. "You can," Richard said firmly. "Not because you'll sound perfect, but because you'll sound true, and truth is what they need." She lay awake that night, staring at the ceiling, fighting panic. She wanted to refuse, but then she remembered David's words in the garden: "What story do you want to tell?" And slowly she realized this was the chance to tell it, not just to a handful of patients, to anyone willing to listen. The day of the conference arrived. The hall was filled with uniforms, lab coats, polished shoes. Doctors and officers and survivors, all gathered in neat rows. Sarah stood backstage, knees trembling, voice tight in her throat. When her name was called, she stepped into the light. The microphone loomed. The room waited. Her chest heaved. She closed her eyes, and then she spoke. Not loud, not polished, broken, raspy, honest. "I was a paramedic. I thought my life ended under rubble, crushed legs, broken voice, no future." A ripple of silence moved through the room. "I thought I was useless. That silence was my fate, but I learned something. Broken doesn't mean useless, it means different, and different can still save lives." Her voice cracked. Her eyes burned. She told them of the anger, the nights she wanted to quit, the way she leaned on someone who refused to let her hide, and the moment she realized she could stand without him. She told them of Jennifer, Michael, Amy, Eric, proof that scars weren't walls but bridges. And when she finished, the hall was silent again, not with pity but with respect. People rose to their feet, applause echoing like thunder. Sarah stood there, trembling, tears streaking her face, not because she felt weak, but because for the first time since the rubble she felt whole. Later, outside the conference hall, a young soldier approached her. His arm in a sling, his eyes haunted. He hesitated before speaking. "I thought I was done," he whispered, "but hearing you maybe I'm not." Sarah's throat tightened. She reached out, resting her scarred hand lightly on his shoulder. Her voice was soft but steady. "You're not. None of us are." That night, as she lay in her hotel room, she thought of David. She wished he could have been there to see it. The woman who once whispered in shame, now standing before hundreds, her broken voice carrying more weight than she ever thought possible. But then she smiled because she knew he didn't need to see it. He had already known. And in that quiet moment, she understood the moral she had been living all along. Strength isn't the absence of scars. It's what you choose to do with them. Hope isn't about going back to who you were. It's about becoming someone new. And dignity doesn't always speak loudly. Sometimes dignity doesn't speak. It simply acts.